Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Unrushed with Nadia. We have an amazing guest from ESMT Berlin, Professor Jan, specializing in leadership, decision making, and organizational behavior. With a focus on the intersection of academia and industry, he brings deep insights into how businesses can navigate complex challenges and foster effective leadership. Welcome, Professor. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much for having me, Nadia.
I'm so pleased you were able to give us some time. Thank you for coming.
Well, it's a pleasure, as I said.
Professor Jan, you are doing extensive research, and in your research, you stress the role of leadership in managing errors. And what is the first step a leader should take to create a culture of learning from mistakes?
Well, I think there are many, but I think one of the first things that you should keep in mind is that errors are not done intentionally. They just happen. And if you'd like to have an open error culture, in a way, you should try to normalize errors. That does not mean you should say, well, I don't care, but it just means whatever you try to do, they will happen. So when they happen, the first question should not be who is the one who's done the error, but how could it happen? What is the reason? Why did it happen? So focus on the reasons instead of the persons, because we are all humans. We all know humans make mistakes, but when bad stuff happens, we typically forget this very basic notion. So these would be the two things I would definitely put on top. And if you're a leader, I think what is also important is that you talk about your own errors. So not only focus on the errors of people who are reporting to you, but actually focus on your own errors and share them, talk about that, because that is also a way of normalizing errors.
That's beautiful, Professor Jan, because I do see when we look into the foundation of the error, why it happened, we are actually taking the responsibility to not only understand it, but also to get on the right path to correct it.
Yeah, an error itself does not mean that something bad will happen. It just means it is not the intended action. And when you capture errors early enough, you can often mitigate the consequences. Yeah, so you can correct and nothing will happen. The only precondition is you have to recognize the error, and that's what is important talking about errors. So that's the whole thing about error management, error culture. People often don't like the word error culture because it might seem, well, you should not care. And it's quite the contrary. You care very much, but you talk about it and try to correct instead of focusing on why somebody did something.
Yeah. And this is correct that there are a lot of time as an individual, and in fact companies also, they often struggle to learn from their failures, and errors are usually called failures. And what do you think is the main barrier to shifting from the blame to learning in organizations and on individual level?
Well, one of the main barriers, first of all, is connected to recognizing errors and methodically capture them, because you can only work on the stuff that you know of. And often organizations are not very good at collecting systematically the errors that happen inside the organization. Often it is because people are afraid to talk openly about that because they fear consequences and so on. And I think that is one of the primary concerns. And then the second thing is errors happen. They're recognized by the individuals who are involved. But if they are not encouraged, let's put it this way, it's not just that there should not be any sanctions, but it's also about understanding that reporting or talking about errors is actually something that sometimes takes effort, but is necessary for setting up the learning environment. And if you look at organizations who are very good at dealing with errors, they focus very much on capturing information, analyzing it, and then coming up with recommendations, and often also sharing it. There's no use of hiding errors. I mean, you can collect errors, you can analyze them, and then you hide it away. That's also no purpose. Actually, you have to put it in a way that people are capable of knowing what has happened. And that means you need platforms, newsletters, or something like that, where you can share the errors and experiences.
That's really nice. And when you advise leaders, because you're very well connected with leaders also, and what is a common misconception they have, which you feel is very common among the leaders and about this error management, and how do you help them overcome it?
Well, I think the first misconception is that leaders expect that people talk easily about something that goes wrong in their organization. That is and they underestimate hurdles that are inside the organization, often connected to a hierarchy. Even if you have relatively flat hierarchies, kind of a hierarchical structure is present, which might prevent people from talking. Then the second thing is you say, well, we'd like to have this open culture. Now let's declare we have an open era culture, and then that's all that is needed. That's definitely not enough. You need people to adapt to something that you may call open era culture, which basically means that people need to understand or need to have the safety of talking openly. They have to have evidence or see evidence over time. That's the whole concept of psychological safety. You have to understand, or you have to believe, that nobody will be humiliated, punished, sanctioned for admitting a mistake, asking questions, voicing concern, and all that stuff. So that's something that takes time to develop. And often leaders think just declaring we have an open era culture, it's enough. When we look at the aviation industry, for example, where they've seen the need for open communication in cockpits has been very evident from multiple accident reports in the 1970s, 1980s, and then they started to systematically train crews in open era communication. But it took about 10 years for the entire staff of airlines to accept actually that it is okay for junior crew members to speak up to seniors, because they had this strong hierarchical culture that's deeply ingrained in their organizations, in their career setups, that was very difficult for them to talk. And it took a long time to establish that open culture. And I think the same is true for normal enterprises. It needs time to take down the mental hurdles to openly communicate about errors.
That's correct. And Professor, I would like to know your opinion on one thing, that there are times that when a leader announces, okay, it's an open culture company. If you have made a mistake, come to me. I'll support you. I got your back. And when somebody makes a mistake and he tries to come and tells it, they are bashed, humiliated, and with every new task, they are like, don't repeat the mistake. You did last time. You did that last time. Remember that? That person stripped into guilt, and he thinks, why I told this, it was not brave, it was stupid. And how do you see this? And do you see this often?
I wouldn't say I see it often, but I see it from time to time. Or the other way, I don't see it, I hear it from the people talking about their own experiences. And I think this is something that we have to keep in mind. I would like to go one step further. Often what you have in organizations is not so much that people are literally punished or fired. So it's not the immediate fear something very bad will happen. But first of all, people are ashamed when they realize they've done an error. Often people are very ashamed, frustrated. And if there's damage connected to an error, something was done in the wrong way, there's damage in medicine sometimes that may harm people. Let's be clear about this. There are some industries who have high consequences of the that the staff has to think about. Something bad happens in this environment. People are very disturbed, first of all, just themselves. It's not outside pressure. So this is the first level that we have to keep in mind. And then there's the second level, that is, how do my colleagues perceive my action? So it's not necessarily the superiors, it's also the colleagues that you have to keep in mind. And then yes, there's the superior who says, well, you did it a second time or so, although the circumstances are different or whatever. And then the whole chain gets into motion and say, well, this was not good, and so on. And you get all these bad things. And you've rightly pointed to that. These things resonate with people, so they keep it in their mind. And the next time it happens, they rather try to be quiet about it as nobody realizes it, just because they fear if, again, they have to report, there will be a big problem. And this is one of the things that we have to keep in mind, that there are a number of things at play that resonate with people. And often these comments that are done when an error is observed are often things that actually reduce psychological safety. So we have to, when we work in teams, we have to be rather careful with the words we use. We should be open, but we should also be not intimidating people and not put them in a very uncomfortable position.
Correct. Again, as you said, that nobody should feel ashamed of the errors they have made, because of course there is a learning and evolution for all the human beings. And do you see that in high pressure environments, whether it's at work or at personal, like home, how can someone balance supporting their teams, family members, while maintaining a high performance, especially in high pressure environment? Do you see? Because there is also competition in siblings for grades, even brutal competition for sales in work, for performance.
Yeah. Well, high pressure environments, let me be also clear with that. There's a debate: is psychological safety, is an open error culture, non-punishing error culture, is that undermining performance? And the whole evidence that we have is actually pointing to the contrary. In other words, the more open the error culture is, the less punishing it is, the more it leads to high performance. There are some areas where that does not immediately apply, but these usually go for routine type of works, where you have standardized routine type of works, where people work in isolation. There are limits with psychological safety. You should have some kind of pressure on these people for proper task execution. But the moment you enter environments where you interact with teams and so on, the more it is clear that there is no optimum level of psychological safety apart from the maximum. So you should always go for providing as much psychological safety as possible. Now, in environments where you have high pressure, I think when I hear high pressure, I usually think in terms of crisis situations. So I'm not sure whether you link to that, because you're mentioning a highly competitive environment. If we go for high pressure environments linked to crisis, I think the main concern there is you need to have open perspectives, and that means you have to be also able to correct perspectives as soon as it is obvious that one perspective is not the right one. You have these kind of situations, it's always good to be as open as possible as a leader. So don't go for directive leadership in these situations. Go for leading by questions. Asking questions certainly help you in these environments. Now, when you link to competitive environments, there the thing is a little bit trickier, because an error that you make may help your competitor. But then on the other side, it may undermine the performance of the team. So it's a double-edged sword. And if you have competitive teams, like, for example, take sports teams. If you are in a team, yes, you compete in a certain way, but if you are not performing right, the whole team suffers. So there is still, even in competitive environments, there's often that notion that you depend on each other and should support each other. And I think this is the role of the leader in these situations, to make sure that people are not competing inside too much. It's fair that they compete for performance, but they should not compete on speculating that others will make errors and then they will benefit from errors. That should not be the way that you should set up organizations. So this would be my recommendations for a leader acting in this kind of environment.
So on another aspect, in crisis situations, how do you see leaders can balance responding to the immediate demands, and they can also keep an eye on the long-term strategy also?
Hmm? It's a good question. From my perspective, most crises don't require immediate action. Even in environments like aviation, where it's obvious, you have high speed, you have demanding environments where you might think immediate action is the most appropriate. Actually, what pilots get trained for is, when you have an emergency, sit on your hands. Don't act, analyze first. And once you have understood the situation, then act. And the point is, even if you have understood the situation, it might still not be the correct understanding of the situation as a whole, especially in complex environments. So you might need to revise your decisions. And in these kinds of environments, like, for example, firefighting, the military, hospitals, and aviation, you are usually not working on the assumption that you just have a perspective of the situation and then make a decision, but actually you might have to reconsider it. And there, a structured decision model where you are allowed for this structured decision making, where you balance risk and and benefits, look at the options, and then make a decision, you should always go for that last part that's a check part. Is everything right? Is everything conforming to what you expect? If so, then continue. If there are any deviations, any things that seem odd, then start to revisit your decision. And I think this is something that is very important for leaders in these situations. Don't go for directive leadership because, well, I've been in that situation before, I know how to act, and then you give orders. It's very hard for your people in the team that you're leading to then contradict you, to argue against your decision. It's much better if you're open, and the best way, as I mentioned before, is using questions, asking your team first, not because they have better ideas, not because they're smarter, just they have different perspectives, different views. They see things from another angle, and that helps you to make better decisions as a leader. And that does not take a long time. That's definitely something that is very helpful for avoiding going in the wrong direction.
That's very solid, Professor Jan. I would like to know that do you think that, or we feel sometimes that it is very difficult for a leader to accept that the decision that he made was wrong and to correct it? And can you share an example of a company that turned a major mistake into a valuable learning opportunity, or you have heard about it?
Yeah. Obviously, as I mentioned before, it's usually not easy to say, well, I've done something wrong. But first of all, we have to keep in mind, often when we take decisions which turn out bad with hindsight, they're not so easy to take in the right way to start with. So we sometimes have these problems that we have limited information, we have to deal with uncertainty, and then sometimes our decisions turn out to be not as good as we thought they are. But that means we should always be prepared to revisit decisions. And there are some examples of decisions of companies who have corrected themselves. There's one very good example, although it is a bit dated. But if you go for the internet, I'm old enough to remember it. In the 1980s, there was a big struggle between Coke and Pepsi. And Coke actually understood the situation. Well, there's a problem with the taste of our drink. So we changed the recipe to make it more like Pepsi. So we're attacking Pepsi on its own ground. Actually, and it was tested. It was not just a decision that they thought, well, we think that's right. Actually, they did a very solid analysis with focus groups and blind tests and so on. But the problem was changing the recipe is not only attracting maybe new customers, but it's actually creating a lot of disappointment and anger with the customers that actually love the current taste. Yeah. And for Coke, this ended up in a giant shitstorm. And then they had to, and they actually, what they did was create a new kind of taste that they called New Coke. And then they realized, oh, it was a big mistake. And then they went back to the old drink, introduced Coke Classic, brought it back as a second option to customers. And then ultimately it turned out actually customers were actually quite happy with the old taste. Now, why am I telling this? Coke was actually very open and saying we did a big mistake in introducing the taste. And they said it was not the mistake of some junior guys. It was a decision made at the highest level of the organization, and we take full responsibility. And the interesting thing is you still find the story on the webpage of Coke. And I think that the title is The Biggest Marketing Blunder Ever. Yeah. So they're very clear that they made a big mistake open, and that sends a strong signal into the organization, but also to the market. We're there to learn. Yeah, we're not perfect. We're humans. We made a big mistake, and we're learning. And if you'd like to have a better or a more current example, I think the way SpaceX is developing its rockets is another good example. They're not saying, well, this was an immediate bad blunder or whatever. But whenever something happens, they're not saying, oh my God, we made a wrong assumption, blah, blah, blah. They always say we have a good learning opportunity. When a rocket explodes, we have lots of data and we analyze the data and so on. They're never saying our engineers did this and this wrong. They always focus on the learning. And I think this reframing is helping them a lot of getting better. So I think these two examples describe it pretty well.
And these two examples are from very big brands in the world. They're not like smaller brands. They accepted there was a mistake and they corrected it. They took the responsibility, they corrected it. And that's why Coke became a giant. Had they not accepted it and stayed rigid, I don't know if they would have lost all the old customer. And of course, new customer was already occupied by Pepsi.
Well, I was just reflecting. I think probably the brand would have survived. What typically would have happened if they would have fired the management. I'm saying you did something wrong, you made a wrong decision, and so on, and then put it on the person. And in this situation, the management was very, very open. There were no consequences with the managers who took the decision, and they were able to correct. And this is often what happens. Yeah, when you allow people to deal with mistakes, often you don't have anything really bad happening. Yeah, and even if there's something very bad, I mean, in aviation, we have lots of accidents. Yeah, where people are dying. This is definitely very bad stuff. But what has happened out of this? Well, the industry learned with every accident. In aviation, you really say learning is done with blood. But the point is they focus so much on the learning that they get better and better and better. And I think there's no coincidence that the most safe industry to this day is the aviation industry, because they're so open about the errors that they are creating learning opportunities time and time again. Yes, sometimes very bad stuff happens, but the point is never to say, well, this was a personal thing. It is almost always a much more complex thing where you have multiple ways of learning and analyzing opportunities.
That's correct. The younger generation has little patience for everything. They want to be very successful very early. They graduate, want to become CEO, entrepreneur, top manager, have a house, a luxury car. Everything should be settled for them the moment they graduate. It's it's your graduation day and next day life happens. I'm sure you are around all these youngsters and who are frustrated with traditional authority also. And how do you see leaders adopt their approach, especially with the new generation, Gen Z, the modern thinkers, to better connect with, motivate the younger generation? And how do you, when you sit with your new students, how do you see this? What is the difference that you see in the students that you had in 1990s or in 2000 and in now?
Well, it's interesting. Although I'm not so sure whether this is really a generational thing, because I think every young generation has certain aspirations and things that they try to strive for. And sometimes it is just saying, well, this new generation is so impatient. I think this is something that goes with use. But from a leader perspective, I think what we should in general see is we come from a world with strong hierarchies, very structured kind of organizations, and so on. I mean, when I joined the industry, when I finished my studies, I did not immediately go into academia or stay in academia. I had some experience in industry. These were very formal environments, and I think this is something in the environments that we live right now, with much faster cycles for innovation and also information spreading. You need to be more flexible, and that calls for more decentralized decision making and so on. And I think that links to the aspirations of younger employees, that they would like to be empowered, take decisions, take responsibility, make mistakes, learn from mistakes. That is linked. Yeah. So when you're empowered, when you can make decisions, you will make wrong decisions over time, and you have to live with it. But if you have an environment that allows you to grow in this kind, then it's benefiting both the individual, because when you are empowered, you have a much higher satisfaction, but also commitment, which benefits the organization. But it also benefits you because you feel competent, you feel meaning, impact, all these positive psychological effects from being empowered. So I think that is something that organizations should focus on: empower people to take decisions for themselves, for their teams, and so on, and allow them to learn and grow. And I think in this environment, then even very ambitious, very impatient young people will see an environment that's both challenging but also rewarding.
Yeah, that's correct. And you have multiple roles. How do you manage your time? And are there any times when you get very stressed and you just need to psych yourselves to stay composed? And how do you avoid the burnout? Does this happen to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. With all honesty, I have to admit I work in an environment which is highly rewarding and very generous, I would say. I enjoy academic freedom, which allows me to set my own pace, set my own focus and where I would like to put my energy in. So that is an environment where I can control the stress level very well by myself. And yes, sometimes you have deadlines and so on. I think that's the normal part, but mostly I'm able to structure the things the way I want it. And this comes back to what I just said before. I'm empowered. I can do the stuff in a way that I think is necessary. And that's highly rewarding for me. And that's what I think. Sometimes there are limitations depending on where you work, but there are good examples. Even in very structured environments, you can delegate decision-making power. And this allows people to set pace for themselves instead of having external pressure. Often people are very effective when they're motivated. So from a leader perspective, I think motivation is the key. It all goes back to intrinsic motivation. When you have intrinsically motivated people, then they will go for high performance and deliver good results. That is what I experience for myself, and which I hope I can relay to the students that I'm worked with, but also with senior leaders that I talk to when I have the opportunity in programs here, for example, at ESMT.
This is great. And Professor Jan, is there a message that you would like to give to youth especially?
Well, the point is be as open as possible about your mistakes. Often it is that the environments that you work in are more forgiving than you might anticipate. Sometimes we are more anxious about consequences than there really are. And be aware you will make mistakes on your way, but take them always as learning opportunities. Yeah, so that's best. I would say try to be as focused on learning as possible and stay that way for your career. I think that would be the advice I would give to young people going forward.
Thank you so much. And one last thing that I will really want you to say for parents, especially the Asian parents who cannot tolerate the errors of their children, and the kids, well, I will call them kids, still are learning, but parents have a face to show to the society. How do you see this, and what is your advice for them?
Well, yep. Well, that's a good point. My best advice that I could give is relax. Everybody makes mistakes when you grow. And the more you understand that mistakes are part of a learning, so it should always be clear that you should strive for the best result. But if you don't achieve that, don't go for punishment, especially as parents. Focus on what can you provide as coaching, advice, or however you might call it, for your kid to grow. It's a little bit like in sports. Yeah, when you do sports, when you start, you will never be perfect. Yeah? And over time, you get better and better. But even the best athletes need coaches because they see these little things that they need to get better and better. So when you think about also learning, growing up and so on, it's always this kind of, how can you get better? And by the way, don't try to, how should I best phrase it? Protect people and protect your children in a way that you say, well, I protect you not to make errors. I think that's also part of the learning experience. Everyone has to make errors over time to realize, well, this was what I thought was what would be going to work or whatever, and it didn't. Yeah. And this is also part of your life. So don't be overprotective, but also don't focus on punishment. Always go for the learning. That would be my strongest advice. I'm not sure whether I'm a good parent. I do have a son, but at least this is what I would, from a academic perspective, from my own observation, say this is what should be the focus.
Thank you so much, Professor Jan. This was lovely. And the message that you gave to everyone is that it's okay to make mistakes and make errors. These are part of human evolution. But learn from it, accept the responsibility, and do better next time. This was Professor Jan with us, telling us that it is okay to make mistakes. What is important is to accept the responsibility, learn from it, grow, and make your way. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. If there is any last message that you would like to give and share your feedback about the podcast before we sign off.
I would just say thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you, and to all those who listened, don't make too many errors. We all know they're not fun, but when it happens, focus on the learning. That's at least my final words.